Welcome back to Rise and Shine, and as we promised you, we do have a very special personality in the studios, Mr. Vipula Wanigasekera, Senior Lecturer at the NSPM Green University, together with us to talk about spirituality and where we are in terms of spiritual development and how do we really get there as well. Good morning to you, sir.
Good morning, it's a pleasure to be here.
So talking about the practice of Buddhism, we've been talking a lot about putting things to practice a while ago as well. I would like to ask you, now when we speak of religions, we have different religions all around the world. Buddhism is one of them. We call it a philosophy as well. So philosophies, religions, where did all of these evolve? And what was the purpose in terms of the initial purpose back in the days? And where are we today?
I think the emergence of religions and philosophies probably run back to the beginning of the civilization, probably 4,000, 5,000 years. And as you know, there's this ancient Hindu philosophy from which there is Samkhya, Yoga, Nyaya, and Vaisheshika, and so on, and then coming to Vedanta, and from there Upanishads, Advaita. Now, what I believe is that the background to the existence of all these religions, are hundreds of them, I don't know how many, and the philosophies is mainly because of the inability of the human intellect to comprehend the nature of the existence. You know, why things happen in particular ways. So all these religions and philosophies are trying to, or attempting to explain why things happen. I just read while I was coming here that there is a particular viral fever that is spreading in the south. And who predicted that? And who was able to say that something like this is going to happen? We have floods. You know, if there was someone who was able to predict that there's going to be floods at this time, at this place, we would have probably saved 20 odd lives and so. So in macro sense, there's an inexplicable nature of existence, and these religions and philosophies are attempting to explain, you know, some are attributing to the creator and the governance and so on, while the others may attribute that to karma, and this is how things happen. And there are others who would say, well, that's how the nature operates. So that, I believe, is the background in which these beliefs and faiths and philosophies are operating.
I see. My question is, I will probably get this question from a lot of your viewers and your... well, sometimes you say that in terms of socio-economic development, we live in a very, you know, fast-moving society. It's all very instantaneous now, and ambition, corporate life, and all of these are factored in.
Yeah, more into materialistic
materialistic life. And those days, I think the whole society probably might have thrived along with Buddhism, when we talk about literary princes and all of that. But how can that be reconciled at the present context?
And I do not know to what extent the religions and philosophies are influencing the economy or social development in a particular country. Perhaps one isolated example would be a country like Bhutan, which is influenced by the Buddhist philosophy, and there the entire governance is, or the success of the country is measured by GNH, the gross national happiness. So not necessarily the wealth, not necessarily the income per capita. So it's a different way of looking at life. So if people are happy, then they call it a success. So that's one isolated example. But if you look at countries like Singapore or even Scandinavian countries, there is very little evidence for us to say that either the religions or the philosophies have really driven their economic progress. And it's, when you analyze, when you look back, the success of these countries, or material success, or whatever you call, is mainly due to clear strategic long-term economic policies, and then leadership by example, and social justice through intellectual dialogue, discussion, and so on. So it is kind of questionable to what extent, although these religions and philosophies have come into being, yes, they are doing something good, they can do something good, but whether there is a direct correlation between them to the economy and social development, it is still questionable.
What about ambition? I mean, one would say like, I'm going to get there somehow by 2020.
Well, you see, the point is, I can answer that in mundane level, or even at spiritual level. So my mundane answer is that you should have an ambition, you should have a goal, you should have a target, and you go for it, And if you don't reach that, then I have to enter the spiritual arena to explain why you cannot reach that. So that's the way it can be explained.
Yes, and also when we see the current day society, I mean, adding to what you said, we see a lot of religions being practiced in different ways. How do you see this now? In Buddhism, also we do have the 5 precepts. And there are, I mean, I've seen people who recite the 5 precepts like every morning and evening, and also chant a lot of gathas and paritas. How do you see the difference in terms of the actual practice and also the chanting side of it, if we elaborate on this aspect?
Yes, now there are 2 sides to this story, and Sri Lanka is fortunate to have preserved the pure form of Buddhism, or what we call Theravada Buddhism, and there are volumes and volumes that are available for anyone who is inclined to know what Buddhist philosophy is all about. There are mundane teachings, there are supramundane teachings, and then the 3 baskets, the Sutra Pitaka or Abhidhamma. All these things are there, and therefore, we can consider ourselves somewhat privileged to have this Dhamma preserved in that manner. But on the other hand, as you rightly said, to what extent the people are following this Dhamma and taking these teachings into their day-to-day practice is certainly questionable, because I think at some point of time, we can see that people are already saying that there has to be a transformation, whether it is individual or collective among the society. There must be a transformation among the people. Otherwise, it will be very difficult for us to call ourselves a Buddhist country while there is that much of poverty in the country and that much of malnutrition among the children, and so much of difference between the rich and poor. You can't possibly have this kind of indicators in a country which practices Buddhism. So I agree with you to that extent. But we should not give up, and I think we need honest people, genuine people who could practice what they preach and set the examples. It's very difficult a leader to have followers if the leader doesn't follow what the leader is preaching. So it applies everywhere. So that transformation is needed, I think, quite urgently as far as Sri Lanka is concerned.
Well, Mr. Vipula, also speaking of the current situation of the world, back in the days was when these religions were found, and then these philosophers really taught this, preached these different religions, including that of Buddhism. We were gifted with this. But however, so many years have passed, and so much of developments in terms of technology, and it's another industrial revolution we are going through, technological revolution, and so much of it. How do you see this when we take a look at the grassroots level of a small kid? I mean, they are the future generation of a nation after all. How should they be actually brought up in order to create this beautiful society we actually dream of?
Because where do they learn, actually, these kids, when they grow up? They have teachers, they have parents, then they have other adults, who are surrounding them, and they have to learn from them. And what we should be doing is to offer them opportunities to go beyond the fences. Otherwise, they are always caught up in a kind of a cage, and then we try to look at the amount of effort the parents are making to make them professionally qualified people in the society, because of the belief that that if you get this position, you will have that much of prestige from the society. It's not because of the person who can render a service to the, say, if you are in the medical profession, you are a healer. And it is not, I'm not suggesting that, everyone is like that, but if you take Sri Lanka, there is an amount of prestige attached to certain positions, designations. But for the world to exist, everyone has to be there, even the janitor, even the laborer or whoever. That's how the balance is there in the existence.
Yes, and adding to what you said, I think, Nadun, even from smaller age, we've seen parents would always compare the marks the other person gets, and so it's always a competition that's created rather than inspiring your kid to achieve that particular position in terms of doing a service to the nation. Thank you,
and there is also another danger. By doing so, you're also killing the creativity in
of
them,
the child,
and the ability to innovate something. You have to allow that room for them to come up with their own things, that they are capable of doing. So our education system and everything has to go through some kind of a reform to allow these things to happen like other countries.
Because sometimes, when you are gift-giving Buddhima, it's either a doctor set or a toy stethoscope, all of that. But I think, at a certain age, I think even the child attains a certain level of maturity and can think rationally for himself. So that's the moment maybe the parent should maybe let go and ask the kid what he wants to do, and then guide him.
Exactly, because there is a need to identify what the child is having a passion for, and then you guide, and you provide facilities, and you provide the environment in which the child can perform. And we don't know, after some time you will realize that this is the area that he is good at, and the parents and the teachers should guide the child towards that kind of a goal.
And also, Mr. Vipula, if I ask you, how do you think would culture and traditions probably support also for the spiritual development of a person?
I think when you say culture, it's a very broad definition, and it is comprising, your practices, traditions, and the way of thinking,
Beliefs,
all that. And if I take a simple example, like a culture which advocates that you have to think of another person before you do something, that is also part of the culture. So the culture certainly encourages a society to grow, provided you are in the right culture. And there are also cultures embedded in certain societies. They have actually come into being as traditions, as rituals, and I don't think they are helping that much, because once they come into being, it's very difficult to break the fences afterwards.
And more often than not, I think it's kind of built in around a more reprimand and authoritative rather than actually to teach and guide, I would say. And
also the extent to which it has gone, like you can't even speak about it. There is a point at which, it's taboo. You can't even leave alone criticism, but at least you cannot question. That is the danger.
All right. Speaking of you brought an interesting question. I really wanted to. I don't know whether we could have gone in that conversation. So I was just waiting for this moment. So thank you. See, an indifferent person or a person who may be like an atheist would say that I would not be interested in Buddhism because of the ritualist aspect of it, the Bodhi Puja and the veneration, all of that. Leave that aside, and I would be okay with it, with the fundamental teachings. What's your thought on that?
Yes, if you look at the core teachings of Buddhist philosophy, none of these practices are there. It is true because someone might come and say, well, I'm not interested in these kind of traditions and these kind of practices, because you can't find a rationale in that. Although, there are some beliefs, and Lord Buddha himself has said, don't believe in anything, you just compare it with, and he gave some ideas like Ragadesha, Moha, and just compare it and see whether it is wholesome or not, and then you proceed. The point is that then, of course, you pull the core messages of the core teachings and then put it across to anyone who is interested to know what exactly the Buddhist philosophy is. Okay. And some would like to say, well, it is very deep, so you have to go on a long, long journey, and perhaps you might find the truth. Maybe not this life, but And others will say, well, it's simple, but it's subtle. As long as you are conditioned in a particular way, you will not grasp it, because spirituality turns things upside down. And if you are willing to take that challenge and willing to disbelieve of what you believed already up to the time that you are, from the day you are born, you are putting all these things, the knowledge, and you have gathered knowledge after knowledge after knowledge, still you don't know how to overcome suffering, for instance. Yeah. And if you say your life is consisting of suffering, and people think, well, it's a sad word, we don't want to hear it, But knowingly or unknowingly, you are going through anxiety, stress, anger, worries, all that, and that's all suffering. But if someone is willing to come out of that and say, well, that's it, and I need to look at life from a different viewpoint, well, then Dhamma is there.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And Mr. Vipula, now I've seen a lot of people, because they're going through a lot of busy schedules in life, they sometimes think probably to become a religious person, you have to wait until your kids finish their education and you're more freer and you're retired. Is this the time for you to actually become a religious person? Why can't we inculcate these values from the grassroots level so that people actually can practice whenever possible throughout their lifetime, not at a particular period once they have probably retired, that they're actually putting things into practice? What do you see?
Yeah, I think that's a good question, because I have come across a lot of people who are now in their retirement, and when I ask them what are you doing, I'm meditating, so they have waited all these years to meditate. And I think there is nothing called, I am here and I'm practicing Dhamma. I mean, you are a part of Dhamma. So every time you say something, every time you take an action, if Dhamma is, or if this philosophy is in you, and every action that you take is linked to the Dhamma, and you will hardly break the rules when you are proceeding. So, I remember when I got into these spiritual studies, I was in my early 20s, so it didn't prevent me, just because I was a young lad, okay, this is not the time to look at Dhamma. And at that time I was speaking to scholars like Alec Robertson, Dr. Theodosy Nanak, these are all Tilak Sundari, Karyusam, and these were all, scholars who were discussing Dhamma. So it was a great opportunity to have met them and learn something from them, and that can shape your life to a great extent. Hey, there's something, go and search, and you might confront something unexpected.
Yes.
Is it possible to learn the fundamental teachings of Buddhism through books, or do you have to be guided by like an elderly person, or maybe like a priest?
Whatever you do, whether you listen to a sermon, whether you read a book, not to forget the fact that this Buddhist philosophy was written down after centuries. It was word of mouth until then. And whatever you do, at the end you need to test what you learn, you need to test. The only way that you can test the Dhamma that you learn, whether it is through a book or a sermon or a discussion, is to compare it with your own experience. And your experience in terms of your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, that's the way to test. And how you interact with the outside world, and how you make a change, and how the world will react, and how the universe will adjust to whatever the changes that you make. That's the only way. There's no other way. Otherwise it becomes a belief. So you have to make a choice. Am I going to be guided by a belief, or will it be experiential? So once you know that whatever you do, whatever the way you learn, it has to be experiential, that is a good way to proceed.
So, Mr. Vipula, the current context in the world, in the society, we see that emotional intelligence is playing a major role in every field, every expertise we see currently. How do you think does the Buddhist philosophy reflect on emotional intelligence and its practice?
Yes, I think science is getting there gradually, slowly, that there's something called emotional intelligence. And this is something that Lord Buddha has mentioned long time ago. And everything is led by emotions. And your emotions can be triggered by feelings and thoughts, and your ability to observe yourself. And when you say observe yourself, what exactly are you observing? You are not, when we say turn your attention to yourself, what do we mean? You only have your thoughts, your feelings, your emotions. And that is the intelligence, and that is the consciousness that you need to access. Which I think, if I may say that most of the people, in spite of the knowledge, if I say they are unconscious, there is some truth in it, because people have the knowledge, but you are unconscious, because most of what you do is not in the interests of the masses.
It actually brings me to my question.
Yes.
One of the fundamental teachings in Buddhism is, I don't know whether I'm right when I'm calling it fundamental, because you're the expert, is maybe being present, being conscious, being aware, being present at the moment. How can an outsider, maybe when they're a non-Buddhist, understand this?
Well, I could answer that in a very simple example. Now, if you look at a discourse called Vipula Wanigasekera, in which Lord Buddha says there's no past and there's no future, and all what you have is the present moment or the now. And that because the past is gone, there's no point in living in the past, and the future is yet to come. And that's the core meaning of Vipula Wanigasekera, but that was communicated long time ago. But then, in the recent past, you have a scholar writing a book called The Power of Now, which is the same. And then 6 million copies of that book is sold, and 39 languages have taken that book into translation. You see the point, something which is understood, which is grasped today after having gone through all this, suffering by the so-called developed people, and something that has been said a long time ago.
Yes, indeed.
Indeed, there was I learned a lot of things. I don't know about you.
Of course, yes. It's very inspiring, and I think, Mr. Vipula, it's interesting to talk about the way we actually really practice this philosophy, because this is where the problem is in the society, and we would like to extend heartfelt gratitude to you for being with us, especially on all the Poet Days, and inspiring us and motivating us on the Buddhist teachings and philosophy, so that we can put things into practice and be happier people. May you be well and happy. Thank you very much. And with that, Mr. Nadun, it's time to wind up our program on Rise and Shine today. We hope all of you enjoyed as we enjoyed presenting it to you. And it is indeed a very blissful Poson Point Day. And we wish all of you to be well and happy. And we would see you same time, same place.
Tomorrow.